Fingerprints of the Gods, the revolutionary rewrite of history that has persuaded millions of listeners throughout the world to change their preconceptions about the history behind modern society. Fingerprints of the Gods is an in-depth research by author Hancock into the archaeological evidence which suggests that human civilization began in a far more sophisticated form than we have traditionally been led to believe. In this book and others like it, he argues for a past golden age, when humanity flourished with advanced knowledge and wisdom, until some cataclysmic event caused the destruction of its people and the loss of all their learning. He then goes on to suggest that this catastrophe was somehow related to the end of the last ice age. And it's around this idea that much of the controversy is built. In my opinion though, Fingerprints of the Gods is not so much a controversial book as it is an inconvenient one. It's very hard to argue against, when all you have to do is look at some of the facts. One of the most inconvenient of these facts is that there is no evidence for the existence of Homo sapiens before 30,000 years ago. This is the date given for the start of the Archaeological culture, which is associated with the arrival of modern humans in Europe. But where did they come from? According to conventional historical thinking, our species evolved in Africa and only started expanding out of that continent after this date. However, if you take a closer look at the origins of Homo sapiens, things begin to unravel rather quickly. Let me explain. There is archaeological evidence of early man living in what is now Israel. That dates back much further than the generally accepted date of 30,000 years ago. For example, the famous burial cave of Menate, which contains many complete skeletons of early humans, has been dated to 28,000 years ago. But other evidence has revealed artifacts and animal bones that were deliberately butchered and left in natural pits going back as far as 60,000 years. There are also traces of ash from controlled fires and signs of primitive tools being used to extract water from underground. All of this long predates the Archaeological culture, but it doesn't tell us who exactly was responsible for them. The problem is that the fossils of early humans found at these sites do not match the profile of Homo sapiens. The earliest remains that can be classified as ours, meaning modern humans, are the MZI and skull skeletons discovered at the same site of Menate, however, have been dated to only 30,000 years ago. What's more, the genetic evidence clearly shows that Homo sapiens were living in South Africa 140,000 years ago. So why does the archaeological evidence suggest that we did start using stone tools or burying our dead until 30,000 years ago? And why is there such a huge gap in our history between 140,000 and 30,000 years ago? How is it that we have no cultural or physical trace of our existence during this period? This is just the first of many inconvenient facts that Hancock presents in his book. Another is that according to the theory of evolution, life should get more simple as time goes on, right? That's because as life forms evolve, they naturally adapt to changing circumstances. The simpler the circumstances, the less energy available. For example, the simpler the organism can become without dying out. However, if we look at the evidence, we see the exact opposite happening. Simple organisms such as bacteria never seem to get any simpler, and complex creatures like butterflies evolved from simpler insects. But perhaps the greatest argument of all against the idea of evolution is the fact that there are features of the human body which are useless, or as we call them vestigial structures which cannot be explained by evolutionary theory. Examples of these include wisdom teeth, the appendix, and even the color vision we have in our eyes. According to evolution, any feature that doesn't help an organism survive will eventually be selected out of the gene pool. But obviously this hasn't happened to these particular features. If anything, the wisdom teeth, which are frequently painful, are becoming larger again. None of this adds up. But I think the real reason why books like Fingerprints of the Gods are so controversial is that they challenge the validity of the conventional linear model of history that most of us were taught in school. This model holds that human development is always progressing towards greater sophistication and complexity. There is a teleological element to it in that it seems to suggest that we were created for some predetermined reason and that we are inevitably moving towards some kind of final goal. This is how we understand the rise of civilizations and the advent of human culture. We assume that it all started in some rudimentary form and has gradually increased in sophistication ever since. However, the Fingerprints of the Gods suggests something quite different. It posits that there were several previous advanced civilizations which had access to technologies and ways of knowing that we have yet to discover. These cultures were not superseded by subsequent generations, but were instead wiped out by some great catastrophe which forced humanity back to a state of barbarism. From here, we eventually picked up the pieces and began to rebuild society from scratch. losing all memory of our advanced past in the process. Hancock bases this hypothesis on the discovery of archaeological sites, which cannot be reconciled with the idea of human progress. For example, there is the 10,000-year-old site of Gobekli Tepe in Turkey, which contains monumental structures made of huge T-shaped pillars. Other examples include the Dogon village in Mali and the Nabta Playa in Egypt, which contain evidence of sophisticated societies complete with megalithic monuments and observatories dating back 10,000 or more years. We also have structures such as Puma Punku in Bolivia and Sacsayhuaman in Peru, whose builders used incredibly precise and advanced techniques to construct buildings that still stand today. Then there are places like Stonehenge in England and the Rollright Stones in Oxfordshire, whose true purpose we still haven't uncovered. So why do so many mainstream archaeologists reject the idea that these sites represent sophisticated cultures? For one thing, they tend to be very old, sometimes going back tens of thousands of years. This clashes with the idea that modern humans didn't evolve until much later, as I mentioned earlier. For another, they exhibit a level of craftsmanship that shouldn't be possible for the supposed age of the materials. But probably the most important reason of all is that they simply fit into the narrative of human progress. They show clear signs of cultures flourishing and thriving, which contradicts the idea that we were hunter-gatherers up until only 10,000 years ago. The Fingerprints of the Gods is essentially an attack on this linear model of history. It presents evidence for cultures which were sophisticated beyond their supposed years, thus throwing into question the idea that we have been making steady progress throughout our existence on this planet. Instead, Hancock argues that there have been multiple advanced civilizations which have come and gone, and that we are only beginning to rediscover their secrets. It may seem crazy to suggest that humans were using advanced technology thousands of years ago, but we shouldn't forget that we are only just beginning to explore this topic. As Graham Hancock himself says, there are countless archaeological sites waiting to be excavated and new discoveries are being made all the time. Who knows what the future will hold? Perhaps one day soon we will uncover evidence of a lost golden age, proving once and for all that our history is far more complex than we ever imagined. Until then, though, Fingerprints of the Gods remains one of the most controversial and thought-provoking books ever written. Its ideas have changed the way many people think about history and have inspired countless others to take up the search for lost knowledge as their life's work. Whether or not you agree with his conclusions, one thing is for sure: Graham Hancock has opened up a Pandora's snatch of ideas which will never go away. And while some of those ideas may seem a bit far-fetched, that doesn't necessarily make them wrong. After all, what is an inconvenient fact? It's just a fact that hasn't been disproven. And until someone comes up with a better explanation for all the evidence that Hancock presents, he deserves our respect as one of the most important historians of our generation. So, if you haven't already read Fingerprints of the Gods, I highly recommend that you do. It's one of the most important books I've ever read and has had a profound effect on the way I view history. If you enjoyed this video, please hit the thumbs up button below to let me know you approve. You can also subscribe to my channel to stay up to date with my latest videos. Thanks for watching.